The frosty Siberian air, thick and prickly, pierced to the bones, but Yura did not feel the cold. In his body, like a string stretched to the limit, the fever of expectation pulsed. His palms were sweaty, despite the fierce December frost of 1998, which mercilessly beat against the windows of his cell, reminding him of the endless icy wasteland beyond the walls. In his hands he held not just pieces of paper, but a kind of ticket to life, created out of despair and brilliant ingenuity, perfectly reproduced rubles. Their paper, previously pale and thin, taken from the prison library under the guise of materials for verification, was softened in his mouth, and then carefully smoothed on the cold, damp wall, as if woven from invisible threads. The paint scraped from the peeling walls of his cell, which smelled of damp and mold, mixed with saliva and drops of water from a rusty, barely working tap, became for him a palette with many shades of gray and dirty yellow. And the fish bones, which the other prisoners spat out in disgust every Thursday, turned into thin, deadly sharp, but extremely precise drawing tools. Tonight, when the moon was hidden behind dense clouds and the wind howled its ominous song, this counterfeit money, born from the filth and hopelessness of Siberian hell, was to open the door to his freedom. Will his fragile but deadly precise scam survive the last, most important step, or will it crumble against the indifference and cruelty of the system? Underscore 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 underscore. Siberia, 1998. For many, the name conjured up images of vast forests, permafrost, and unbearable cold. But for millions, it was synonymous with the Gulag, the place where Russia dumped those it deemed waste, criminals, or simply undesirable. In this ruthless land, where even the sun seemed a dim memory of another life, stood a concrete monster, a maximum security prison known among its inmates as the Black Dolphin, though its official name meant nothing to the average person. It was a place where hopes died before they could be uttered, where human dignity dissolved in filth and cold, and time stretched on forever. It was here, in this stone womb, that 26-year-old Yura was thrown. His life, so far full of noisy streets, fast money, and adrenaline coursing through his veins, was abruptly cut short. He was not a political prisoner, he was not a dissident. He was accused of robbery and extortion. These were actions that brought him quick but dangerous profits, and ultimately, a complete downfall. The sentence was 15 years in this grave. It sounded like life, because only a few came out of here alive, and even more so healthy. Most remained here forever, either in the permafrost of the cemetery, or in a mutilated body and a broken mind. The prison greeted him with its fetid breath. Cold, peeling walls, soaked with the smell of urine, vomit, rot and inevitable fear that hung in the air like a fog. Icy concrete floors, constantly ringing from drafts that penetrated through the cracks and from the footsteps of guards who constantly patrolled. Meager, disgusting rations, consisting of overcooked porridge and black bread, barely supporting the prisoners on the verge of exhaustion, not letting them die, but not letting them live fully. And the endless, depressing grayness of monotonous, hopeless days that dragged on like an eternity. The law of the jungle reigned here, but not the wild ones, but those created by human cruelty. The strongest, the most cunning, or the most cruel survived. The weak were doomed. Yura, surprisingly, did not break. He refused to accept his fate. He knew that if there was an entrance, there must be a way out. His mind, accustomed to quick decisions and unconventional moves in the wild, immediately began to work. He did not just exist, he searched. He searched for any gap, any loophole in this seemingly flawless system. The first weeks were a continuous torture. Hunger was constant, gnawing at his stomach, the cold penetrated his skin, and the constant pressure from the prison administration and other prisoners, who saw him only as fresh meat or a potential slave, tested his strength. Fights were a daily routine, and Yura learned to fight dirty, for survival. But he held on. He didn't just watch, he analyzed. He studied how this rotten system functioned, breaking it down into its components. He looked for cracks, weaknesses, vices. And most importantly, he looked for its corrupt schemes. Because it was through them, he knew, that everything that could give a chance for life seeped out. He saw how guards turned a blind eye to minor violations for a bottle of vodka or a pack of cigarettes, how older, thieves, prisoners received better food, how forbidden things appeared somewhere. It was a system that lived on betrayal and corruption. Underscore 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 underscore. Every Thursday, as in the entire Gulag system, prisoners were given fish. Small, thin, with many small, sharp bones that stuck in their teeth and scratched their throats, causing irritation. Most simply threw them away or swallowed them together with the fishy mass that could hardly be called food, or even just ate them, not paying attention to the bones. But Yura collected them. Carefully, one by one, hiding them in the cracks between the bricks in the cold, always damp wall of his cell, which smelled of mold. He knew that anyone who saw it would think he was crazy. Fish bones are a strange arsenal for a man who planned to accomplish the impossible, but for Yura they were the future scalpels of his freedom, his only available tools. His other material was the paint from the walls. Peeling, cracking, it was peeling off in layers, revealing ugly, dirty concrete. Yura began to methodically, in small pieces, peel it off with his nails, tearing his fingers until they bled. He worked slowly so as not to leave traces that could attract attention during the daily inspections. Then, mixing this powder with a small amount of water, which he managed to beg from his neighbors for a favor, or brutally beat out of the weaker ones, he got a semblance of liquid, thick paint. This process was painfully slow and required incredible caution so as not to attract the attention of the guards, whose eyes were everywhere and whose ears heard the slightest rustle. At night, when the footsteps in the corridors died down to the barely audible shuffling of guards' boots, and the only light in the cell was the dim, dirty glow from the hallway lamp, Yura would begin his work. It was his ritual, his meditation, his only connection to the world beyond the walls. He used fish bones as incredibly thin brushes, grinding them on concrete to get the necessary sharpness and shape, and the resulting paint as a palette. His canvas was pieces of paper, which he also obtained dishonestly. He begged other prisoners for the promise of future service, promises that he planned to fulfill in order to preserve his reputation, or quietly stole from the prison library when he was taken to cultural and educational activities that were nothing more than another humiliation. What he was drawing was not just a copy. It was a stunning, eerie masterpiece of forgery. It was fake money. Not just primitive drawings, but ones that were indistinguishable from the real thing. Yura had a unique, almost sick gift. He could reproduce the smallest details of banknotes, watermarks, microtexts, even the relief of the printing, which was barely visible to the naked eye. He spent hours, days, weeks perfecting his skills, repeating elements from memory, which turned out to be phenomenal. He compared his creations with the one and only real banknote, which he had once seen in the hands of a supervisor counting bribes, and which he had studied down to the last line. His hands, hardened by hard work and fights for survival, displayed unexpected precision and delicacy, as if he were a surgeon, not a prisoner rotting in a Siberian cell. Gradually, with each new masterpiece, his confidence grew. He built up a small but significant stash of counterfeit bills, carefully hiding them in his cell, in a secret place that only he could find, under the rotten plank floor, disguised so that even the most careful search would not reveal anything. This was his treasure, his future, his only chance. Underscore 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 underscore. The prison system, despite all its demonstrative severity and apparent impeccability, was riddled with corruption to the core, like worms in a rotten fruit. The guards, who were sitting on a meager salary that barely allowed them not to die of hunger, were ready to turn a blind eye to any evil if they were paid for it. For a small sum, they could sell their souls to the devil, their honor and conscience. This was exactly what Yura was going to play on. He understood that this was his only way. His first purchase was quality paper. Thin, smooth, with minimal lint, it was vital for the further improvement of his forgeries. He turned to one of the guards, known for his voracious greed and passion for vodka, and offered him an additional payment for scarce materials for prison needs. The guard, surprised by the impudent offer from a prisoner who was supposed to be poor, hesitated at first, sensing danger, but when Yura handed him some of his money, his eyes widened in surprise, and then shone with rapacity and greed. The bills looked perfect. No ATM, no cashier at any commercial outlet would have distinguished them from the real ones. The risk seemed insignificant compared to such easy earnings. Thus began his secret, deadly trade. For the counterfeit rubles born from the filth and despair of his cell, Yura received better paper. This allowed him to create even more convincing counterfeits that would pass even the most careful, albeit rare, checks. He could produce bills of different denominations, which expanded his capabilities. Additional food. Hunger was a constant companion of the prisoners, and fresh food brought in from outside, meat, vegetables, fruits, was a real luxury, a source of strength and energy needed to survive and carry out the plan. Warm clothing. Siberian winters were merciless, and warm clothing could save him from frostbite or death from hypothermia. He was given extra blankets, socks, and hats, which allowed him to survive in the inhuman conditions. Information, the most valuable commodity in this system. Yura paid for diagrams of corridors, underground communications, guard shift schedules, surveillance camera locations, and supply schedules. Every bit of information was a building block in his future escape plan. He questioned about weaknesses in the security system, about prisoners who worked in the kitchen, in the laundry, in the boiler room, anywhere he could find a loophole or a potential accomplice. He collected data like a detective, processing it in his brain. Services, from other prisoners. With his money, he could hire other prisoners to run errands, relay messages between blocks, distract guards at the right moment, or even physically remove undesirable elements that might get in his way. He created a web of obligations and debts. Tools, small tools such as sharpened metal objects, under the guise of needles for repairing clothes, thin wires that could serve as lock picks, small screwdrivers, anything that might be needed for his further plans. All of these were passed around under the guise of repair tools or craft materials, or simply forgotten items. Yura acted cautiously, like a predator hunting prey. He never revealed the true source of his funds. He presented himself as a man with outside connections, or won something at cards, or received a large transfer from relatives. This satisfied most corrupt officers who did not want to question their easy enrichment, fearing exposure. His reputation inside the prison grew. He was feared, but also respected. He became the Grey Cardinal of this hell, who could solve almost any issue if he was paid to do so. He felt how the network he was weaving was becoming stronger, how his influence was growing stronger. His goal was not just to survive, but to break free, to leave this stinking place forever. An escape plan was forming in Yura's head gradually. With each new crumb of information he gnawed out of his system like a hungry rat. He knew that his physical condition was key. He trained in his cramped cell, doing push-ups on the dirty floor, squats using his own body weight, simulated running in place to keep his cardiovascular system going. Every morsel of food he got for his money went to sustain his strength, not pleasure. He slept minimally, saving every second to work on his fakes and his plan. His goal was not simply to escape from his cell, but to break out of the prison's perimeter and then out of Siberia. This required meticulous, almost manic, preparation and anticipation of all possible risks. Studying routes. With the help of the information he had purchased, Yura had thoroughly studied the layouts of the corridors, underground passages, and ventilation shafts that ran through the prison like veins. He knew where the blind spots of the surveillance cameras were, where the guard changed less frequently, and where there were technical areas that were less monitored. He had studied the layouts of the drains, communication tunnels, even the garbage collection routes and the location of the guard posts. He had literally recreated a three-dimensional model of this prison in his head. Escape tools. He ordered from corrupt guards, under the guise of repair tools, for a handyman club. Such a club, of course, did not exist. Several items that could help him escape: a small but sharp knife, a broken piece of the blade wrapped in a rag, a rope, under the guise of a clothesline made from prison sheets that he bought for money, a small but bright flashlight, which was officially issued for technical work. He hid all of these in his secure, almost invisible hiding place under the rotten floor, where no one would find them. Legend, for cover. Yura also began to develop a legend for his absence to buy time after his escape was discovered. He ordered from one of the prisoners, who had sewing skills, and was able to work secretly without asking unnecessary questions, several changes of clothing that resembled civilian clothes, but were made from the same prison clothes, altered and dyed. He knew that a new, dangerous world awaited him beyond the gates, and he had to be prepared for it. He also took care to leave behind traces that could mislead the investigation, several fake letters that allegedly indicated his suicide or surrender to other prisoners who were already outside the prison. A few days before the planned escape, Yura began to act on the verge of risk, balancing on a thin line. He deliberately provoked small but noticeable conflicts with other prisoners to create the appearance of a problem prisoner who had gotten off his feet from his long imprisonment. This was supposed to distract attention from his real plans, to make the guards think that he was just going crazy and did not pose a serious threat. He also began to create the illusion of his presence in the cell, using pillows and blankets, carefully folded so that his silhouette could be seen through the crack in the door. He learned to imitate snoring, which was supposed to mislead the guards during night rounds. The night of December 26, 1998, was particularly cold and windy. The Siberian wind howled like a beast of prey, and the snow fell in thick, heavy flakes, drowning everything around him, creating the perfect camouflage for his escape. The night was as black as the hopelessness that reigned in the prison. Yura, dressed in several layers of thin but warm prison clothes, under which were hidden his altered, civilian, clothes, sat on the bed like a statue, waiting for his time. His heart was pounding like a bell ringing the last seconds before execution, but his mind was as icy and focused as the blade of a knife. He felt every vein, every muscle in his body, ready for action. When the clock hanging on the wall of the corridor and audible even in the cell showed exactly 2 in the morning, Yura began to act. It was the time for the changing of the guard, a time when attention was somewhat dulled. He took out his tools from his stash. With the wire he had ordered as part of a radio receiver, he carefully, barely audibly, began to unlock the lock on his cell door. He worked blindly, feeling every detail of the mechanism. It took longer than he expected, his hands were freezing and numb from the cold, but his movements were calm, almost meditative. He could hear his own breathing, which seemed too loud in this absolute silence. When the door clicked softly, as if it had taken its last breath, Yura slipped into the corridor. He moved like a shadow, using his knowledge of the guard-changing schedule. He knew that this was the least controlled time, when the guards were napping or doing their own thing, and patrols were minimal. Every step he took was measured, every movement silent. He glided like a ghost. His path led through a labyrinth of stinking corridors, past locked cells where other prisoners slept, downstairs, and then to one of the ventilation shafts. He had found this shaft on old blueprints that he had managed to buy from one of the prison engineers, who was as corrupt as he was drunk. The shaft was narrow, dirty, clogged with dust, and smoky from filters that had not been cleaned for a long time. Yura squeezed through it, gasping for air from the dust that settled in his lungs and the icy cold that penetrated every crevice of his body. He could hear his clothes tearing, his skin scraping against sharp metal protrusions, but he did not stop, despite the pain. He crawled through several sections, feeling his body scrape against the sharp edges of metal, until he reached the exit that led to the outer perimeter of the prison. The exit was disguised as an ordinary ventilation hole, but Yura knew that behind it lay freedom, not just fresh air. He used a knife to unscrew the rusty, antiquated fasteners that held the metal grate in place, and carefully, as if being born into the world, he slipped out. Once outside, Yura felt the icy Siberian wind on his face, cutting like glass, burning his cheeks. All around was only an endless white veil of snow and impenetrable darkness, in which the dim lights of the prison, which now seemed so far away, barely flickered. He was outside the walls, but not yet safe. Ahead lay kilometers of deserted forest, where even animals were lost, and merciless, deadly cold. He ran. He ran as fast as he could, not looking back, not feeling the pain that pierced his tired body. He ran until his legs began to give out, and his lungs burned from the frost, like acid. The snow crunched under his boots, leaving behind tracks that would soon be covered by new, fresh snow that was coming harder and harder. He knew that he had only a few hours before his absence would be discovered. Then the chase would begin, dogs, snowmobiles, men with guns who knew every corner of this taiga. But Yura was ready. He had a plan, a map in his head, and an iron will to live. He disappeared into the endless, gloomy Siberian taiga, leaving behind only a legend. He ran for hours until his strength left him. He found temporary shelter in an abandoned hunting lodge that he had seen on old maps. There he rested, warmed himself as much as possible, and continued on his way. He went east, where, according to his calculations, the railway line should be. For several days he ate what he found in the forest, and then, having reached the railway, he waited for a passing freight train. His counterfeit money helped him get food and warmer clothes in small, God-forsaken villages where no one checked the bills too carefully. He was able to get to the big city, then even further, using different modes of transport and constantly changing his appearance. To this day, Yura has never been found. His story has become part of prison folklore, a tale whispered in the corners of the cells, about extraordinary intelligence and an unwavering will to freedom. His name has become a symbol for those who dreamed of escaping this system. Where he is now, what he does, no one knows. Perhaps he has found a new life for himself, using his unique skills for other, less dangerous things. Perhaps he has become an elusive master of forgery in big cities, or he has changed his name and started life from scratch. Or perhaps he has been swallowed up by the boundless, cruel Siberia, leaving behind only a cold trace, scattered by the wind. But one thing is certain, Yura, a prisoner of a Siberian prison, has shown that even in the most terrible, most vile conditions, a person can find a way to escape if his mind and will are stronger than any bars.